Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to bring you guys up to speed here on the latest. We just got a verdict that came down here from the jury minutes ago that said that the family of Demetrius Pogortry, the mom and dad, Antonius and Rosemary, are not liable financially for the death of the 10 people back in 2018 when their son Demetrius admitted to killing them. We are hearing now from attorneys in this case, I believe. Let's go right now to the podium and hear some more details.
Institution where he's being evaluated and they're trying to restore him to competency. I don't represent him. I haven't seen him, but I have visited with the criminal defense attorney and others, the criminal defense team that is responsible for him. And the plan right now is to try to restore him to competency so he can stand trial for the actions of May 18th. But unless or until that happens, he'll remain where he is as far as I know.
I know earlier today you weren't certain exactly how this was going to play out. Now that we have a conclusion, what are your thoughts?
I'm very glad and relieved. It was a very long, hard trial. And as I said before, not trying to take anything away from the pain and the suffering and the terrible things that happened to the plaintiffs, but my clients were also made victims of this event as well. Their son's mental illness and the sudden psychotic break left them in a world of uncertainty, not only emotionally, but also, with the lawsuit being filed 6 days after and their son facing criminal charges. So they've not only lost their son, he'll never be the same as who he was before from his mental illness health break, but, he's also incarcerated, and they also have to deal with the aftermath of being the parents of the person who did this.
They're not going to speak to us, so what did they tell you once the verdict was read?
Basically, they were just crying. I told them I would speak with them later. They're overjoyed, and the dad said specifically that his most important thing was he wanted everyone to know that, that he's a good person, and he's always tried to be a good person and a good dad, and he really felt that that had been lost over the last 6 years with these, allegations hanging over the family. Yes, sir.
I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but do you have any concern? This is a precedent-setting case, potentially.
Possibly.
Do you have any concern that your successful defense here could be used in the future?
No, I think people have an obligation to take care with their weapons. These people did that. They locked them up. They locked up all of the weapons. They didn't have ammunition for the weapons. They had them locked up, and they hid the keys. Short of having a separate lockbox for the keys, or burying them in the backyard and making a treasure map or something else, there's really not much more they could do. They certainly had no belief that anybody would break into these cabinets. Now, do they wish they had done something like that? Absolutely. Maybe this will serve as a lesson to people that maybe you need to take additional steps. This might not be enough, but the reality is no matter what you do, even if you were to hide the keys in the backyard in a lockbox, if somebody wants to find them, they can find them. If somebody wants to break open a gun cabinet, they can break it open. There are always ways to get things if they want to. And I think that's why the definition of ordinary care was so important here. What was reasonable for them to do under the circumstances, and they did more than what was reasonable. They had 2 locked containers for all of their weapons, and they locked them up and they made them safe. This was just an individual whose delusions had driven him to a criminal act that led him to be motivated enough to search the house. And, there's a lot of the writings that are in evidence, some of which we really didn't get to talk about because you may have heard me mention there's like 776 pages alone from the documents retrieved from Dimitri's computer. That's not including the handwritten journals. But in some of the writings, he talks about some of the other ways he anticipated getting guns. He was considering doing a fake ID and trying to go to a gun show and get a gun. He tried to get a gun from some friends, apparently, according to his writings. But then again, do you believe what he wrote? That's a different analysis altogether. But I think when an individual is motivated to do something, they will find a way. So I don't know that there is a foolproof way to keep this from happening. Just like the young man who testified said, I have a 400-pound safe at home. Well, I understand what you're saying, but 2 men could pick up that 400-pound safe, take it outside, and roll over it with a bulldozer. So there's always a way. what is reasonable is what we should be looking at. And then if somebody commits a crime, we hold that person responsible for the crime they committed, not the parents in this case.
I'm not sure if somebody already asked this, but could your clients be made to pay any of the damages that's owed by their son now? Because he was 17 at the time.
No, I don't believe so. I believe that the verdict is as such that he is responsible, Dimitri is responsible for the damages, along with Lucky Gunner, and the percentages, if I remember correctly, was 80-20. So with Dimitri being responsible for 80% of the damages and Lucky Gunner being responsible for 20%. Anything else? Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too. Be safe.
Your name, please, just so we can have it.
Yes, Clint McGuire.
And your affiliation here?
Yeah, I represent some of the plaintiffs in the case.
Can you speak on how your thoughts, your emotions right now after the verdict was read?
Well, we respect the jury's verdict in the case. We respectfully disagree with the outcome. We believe that parents should safely store their guns. We don't believe that these parents did so. We don't believe that the parents used reasonable care in getting their child treatment for mental health. We are excited, let me say that a different way. We appreciate that the jury in this case found the shooter responsible for committing an assault, an aggravated assault, on each of the plaintiffs that we represented. We appreciate the jury considering the evidence and finding that an ammunition seller shouldn't be permitted to come into our state online and sell to a 17-year-old by merely being able to check a box. So we appreciate them being held accountable. And this is one of the largest verdicts in the history of Galveston County. We would have liked to had the parents share in their responsibility for this. We're going to continue to do everything we can as lawyers. I'm super fortunate to have practiced and to have tried this case with an awesome set of lawyers on our side who are dedicated to the cause of making our schools safer, both for the students and the teachers. The sad thing is that this is not the last school shooting that we're going to encounter. There will be more. And as we have noted in this case, the parents are the first line of defense. And if we keep looking for solutions on a higher level, like the government or some other way, but parents they should know their kids better than anyone else, and they should be all of our first lines of defense.
A lot of family talked about how this could very well be their only day in court, their only chance at any kind of closure, and also that they at least, you were able to bring out a lot of the information that they had wanted to know. Can you talk about that? Did they express any of that to you before they left or during what their thoughts were on that?
Yes, the group of lawyers that we worked with in this case, we felt very fortunate to be able to get information to help provide some closure for the families about what happened and why it happened. We didn't get the ultimate outcome that we wanted, but we are making progress on this. And with each one of these cases, if we can show that if you don't safely store your guns, if you don't get your child mental help when the red flags are there, then lawyers such as ourselves are going to file a lawsuit, and we are going to put this in front of a jury. And one of these days soon, 12 men and women, even in this red state of Texas, are going to say enough is enough. That's not reasonable. Our goal in this case was never to take anyone's weapons from them. Our goal was to simply say two things. Get your child mental health treatment, number one. And number two, safely store your guns. That's what responsible gun owners do. And that fight is not over with. We're going to keep that up.
You talked about Lucky Gunner. They already settled out of court, right, in another case. Are they going to be held liable again? To pay again? Is that even possible?
Well, the judge will take the jury's verdict and enter a judgment. Lucky Gunner has previously entered into a settlement, and my understanding and impression is that that will be final, the settlement that they entered into, and that's that. The important thing from the jury today is that they found that Lucky Gunner failed to use reasonable care by having no age verification for selling deadly ammunition to kids who can then take it and go shoot up a school or commit other types of shootings. So the important thing the important takeaway here is the jury found, after hearing the evidence in the case, that Lucky Gunner shared in part of what occurred.
Right, but can you speak to just how kind of soul-crushing this outcome must be for some of your clients?
Yeah, it's a very tough outcome because they believe to their core, just like we as the lawyers do, that these parents shared in the responsibility for what happened. And so, yes, of course, it's very difficult to try a case for a couple of weeks, to see all of this evidence of the red flags that were showing that these parents, that their son needed help, to learn during the course of this case that they had actual knowledge that something was wrong, and yet they did nothing. And so even though we didn't get the outcome that we wanted, thanks to wonderful folks like you, we're getting the message out there, because our objective in this case is if we get one child home from school or some other place, then what we did in this case, we've achieved our goal.
Is there any room for an appeal or a new lawsuit, a new course of action?
Well, we'll have to consider all of the options, but as of right now, we're just going to say that we respect the verdict, even though we respectfully disagree with at least a portion of it.
So what's next for the families? Have you decided what they want to do next?
You know, I haven't had the opportunity to get with those families. One thing I know for sure is that they are hoping that one day Demetrius Pogorchis will stand criminal trial for this premeditated murder of his classmates and his teachers. So we are hoping that that is on the horizon and that he will be found criminally responsible for what it is that he did.
You spoke to jurors just before this. Are you able to say what came from that conversation?
No, I'd prefer to sort of keep that, and if they would like to speak to you guys, they can do so. I don't want to mischaracterize or misstate what it is that they say. We are very appreciative. They spend a lot of time. They've listened very intently. Judge Ewing is one of the best judges I've ever had the privilege of practicing in front of. We're super lucky to have him as a judge in Galveston County. And so with regard to the jurors in the case, if they have any comments, then we'll leave it up to them to tell you what their thoughts were and how they reached the outcome that they did. Anything else?
Will you be the only person speaking?
Alton, I believe, is going to speak. Yes.
Just briefly, this jury took the facts of this case and the law as it's given to them here in the state of Texas. And the way reasonable is now defined in Texas needs to be redefined. It seems like we always expect the government to do everything for us, and the government can help. They can help a lot. And we know that there's legislation that's not being passed, but hopefully will be. We know schools can do a lot, but schools can't parent children. Parents have to parent children. And that's the first line of defense. But this jury reached its decision based upon the laws that exist in our state at this time. So you can't really fault them. We're disappointed, but you can't really fault them. But what is reasonable? As the law exists today, the way these parents, this jury found, was reasonable. Well, the way I define reasonable, if a gun gets taken away and someone gets hurt, that's unreasonable. Is there really a margin of error when it comes to our children? To me, there's not. To others, perhaps it is. But our foundation of our country is based upon our children. And if we can't protect them, who can we protect? Our government, our families, all of us have a duty to our children. We're disappointed in the verdict, but we understand why the jury did what they did. As lawyers, if you only think the jury's good when they find for you, then why did you swear to the Constitution? We're disappointed, but we respect this jury's verdict. We got a great trial from this judge. As far as where we go, someone was asking, where do we go from here? There's not any more litigation that's planned. There's not a lawsuit out there. But these families they don't want their children's memories to be lost forever. If you saw the documentary, it says the kids of Santa Fe, the largest unknown mass shooting. When we hear mass shootings, what do we think of? Parkland. We think of Columbine. We think of Uvalde. Nobody ever mentions Santa Fe. Not that any of them are good. There's not a good shooting. And we really had hoped to keep their memory alive with a result in this case that would make a difference. And it takes juries because our legislators are not going to do it. It's just as simple as that. Parkland was Sandy Hook, 12 years ago. 26 people died. 20 of those were 6 and 7 years old. What do you need as a country to see that we're not doing it right? And what has changed? Not one thing. We are passionate about this. It was a pleasure to represent these families. As lawyers have said, is there something I could have said or done differently? We don't really think that we left anything that we would have done different than what we did. As has been mentioned, we appreciate very much each of you being here to bring an emphasis on what should be important to us all.
Quick question for you. Certainly not the outcome these families were looking for or expecting in some regard. I know you guys were talking to them after the verdict came out. How are those families feeling? We saw some of that emotion inside of courts.
You know, as disappointing as the verdict was today, you can't hurt these families any more than they've already been hurt. So do they wish that something good had come of it? And quite frankly, a jury verdict can bring some comfort. To have 12 people that you don't even know that say your child was important. There's something that's good about that. That didn't happen. But as I said, you can't hurt these people any more than they've already been hurt.
Did anybody feel from your team or parents that the school district was liable at all?
Well, the school district could have done a better job. They really could have. Everybody could have done a better job. You know, we're not here to try to defend the district. We're not here to try to defend anyone because we all have an obligation to our children. The school district had some signs that they should have picked up on, and they didn't. But it's if they were trying to blame the school district for the parents' failure. That just doesn't seem fair to me. Thank you guys again.
All right, you just heard from lawyers there in this settlement, this verdict, I should say, that was read here just a little bit ago. We've been following this case in Santa Fe for weeks now, and today a jury found that the parents of Demetrius Pagorchis are not financially liable for the mass shooting that took place in 2018. However, when you talk about who is responsible for that shooting in this civil trial, the jury said that 80% of the responsibility fell on Demetrius Pagorchis, the shooter. The other 20% is the responsibility of the company where he purchased the ammunition as an underage young man. First, we heard from the defense. The defense lawyer essentially came out and said, we got an update on Demetrius because in terms of the criminal trial for his actions, again, this was a civil trial, but in terms of his criminal actions, Demetrius, the case is basically at a standstill indefinitely because he was found not suitable to stand trial. So from a criminal standpoint here today, we got an update from the defense essentially saying that doctors are trying to restore him to a level of competency where he would be able to stand trial. But as of right now, the criminal portion of this is basically at a standstill. But the civil portion of this case came to a conclusion here today. The defense attorney went on to say that this was really a long, hard trial, and it also impacted Demetrius's parents, Antonius and Rosemarie, essentially saying that they became victims as well after that mass shooting. The second their son confessed to killing the 10 people that day and injuring more than a dozen, they became victims as well, because that lawsuit, which ended again here today, was filed shortly after that. And then in the midst of all of this, in the last 6 years, there, at least from what I can tell from the defense attorney, they were saying that there's been charges in this lawsuit, and it's really chipped away at the parents as well, who emotionally they're dealing with their son, who not only committed this heinous act, but now their son is also behind bars after suffering that mental break, according to the defense attorney. However, she went on to say that they are overjoyed, and the father even saying, the father telling the defense attorney that, you know, he's a good person. He tried to be a good father, but may have been lost in the 6 years of this trial. We also heard from the defense, went on to say that a core portion of this case really centered on what was considered the definition of ordinary care. What is ordinary care? The ordinary necessary care of your weapons. And that was important here because, according to the defense, the parents, Antonius and Rosemarie, you know, they had 2 locked containers for their weapons. Again, 2 locked containers. And according to the defense, that was ordinary care, the reasonable and ordinary and necessary steps to protect their weapons. But she says when an individual is motivated, he or she will find what they're looking for to commit a heinous act. And that is what we saw unfold at Santa Fe High School. She also referenced the writings that Demetrius had, where she says if this wasn't how he received the weapons or he got his hand on the weapons, there were other ways he was looking to do that, even if that meant trying to get fake IDs or even going to a gun show or even getting a friend to get a weapon. Shortly after that, we then heard from the prosecution. First, we heard from Clint McGuire, one of the prosecutors on the case, first and foremost thanking the jurors and respecting the decision they came to here today, but obviously disagreed with the outcome. He says we would have liked for the parents to be held financially responsible. And, you know, what was really jarring in all of this, he says this will not be the last school shooting. There will be more school shootings in our country. And ultimately, parents are the first line of defense. And one of the days here soon, he says, the jury will say enough is enough. This was a historic case from the standpoint that the, this was a historic case from the standpoint of the parents of the victims looking to hold the shooter's family financially responsible, saying that the parents of Demetrius Pagorchis did not address his mental health issues enough to provide him with what he needed to basically have a better or deal with his emotions, and they were trying to hold them financially responsible for that. And that was the core of the case. But he says that at some point there will be a jury in this country that says enough is enough. You know, you have state and federal law when it comes to this issue. You have schools that may do various things to try to protect the campus grounds on any school here across the country. But at some point, we have to realize that parents are the first line of defense. And he says at some juncture in our country, a jury will say enough is enough and potentially hold parents responsible for their child's actions. He also went on to say, Lucky Gunner, that is the ammunition company where Demetrius got his hands on the ammunition for that day. Quick note, that company has entered into a settlement, but again, they were held 20% responsible. According to the prosecutor, he believes that that will be the ultimate settlement that they settle on, and this will not be an addition to. We then heard from another prosecutor here today, and this was probably one of the most telltale signs here. He says reasonable, the word reasonable, and it comes to these cases here in Texas, needs to be redefined. Again, ordinary care, the definition of ordinary care and what that meant, how these parents locked up their weapon, whether or not that they did enough. You know, that was the core of the case. And he says the definition of reasonable has to be redefined. Parents have to be that first line of defense. And then, he says our legislators are not doing enough, essentially. They're not going to address this issue. And it's been a difficult 3 weeks, throughout this case. We've also heard from not only the parents of several of these victims, we also heard from some of the survivors in this case, and lots of tears were shed on the stand on multiple days throughout this case. We heard from Flo Rice, a woman that was shot 6 times in the leg. We also heard from the parents of Sabika Sheikh from Pakistan. They Zoomed on a Zoom call. They shared their testimony on what it's like to not have their daughter by their side now. It's been a very, very difficult 3 weeks. And, at the end of the trial, the judge really shared some powerful and compelling words to really encompass what I would imagine just a really intense and emotional trial. I want to quote some of the statements from the judge. He's first and foremost talked about the pain and hurt felt by so many from the mass shooting that took place in 2018. But he says, despite what the jurors have heard in the last 3 weeks, despite what the parents have felt over the last 6 years after not having their child alongside them, he says, I know we can survive. Why? Because there is still goodness in this world. He even went on to quote Anne Frank, another emotional portion of his statements there after reading the verdict. But he too went on to say that we need to protect our kids. They need to feel safe. And that was something echoed by the prosecution as well. Just a really difficult situation all in all. Here today, a jury found the parents of Demetrius Pagorchis not liable for his actions that took place in 2018 at Santa Fe High School, killing 10 people and injuring more than a dozen as well. The victims' families really sought to hold Demetrius's parents, Antonius and Rosemarie, financially liable in the civil lawsuit for what took place, saying that the parents failed to provide the necessary support to their son and his mental health, and they really didn't do enough to prevent him from accessing their guns. Today, a jury did not side with those families. In fact, they ruled that the parents of Demetrius Pagorchis were not financially liable for his actions that day. 80% of his the responsibility falls along Demetrius. The other 20% is Lucky Gunner LLC, the company that sold him the ammunition. In all, as the judge continued to read the families of each of the victims, totaling, it's about more than $200 million in damages, including pain and anguish, is where the damages will fall. But again, that is for Demetrius and the Lucky Gunner LLC. So we're going to continue to kind of just get some more information on this case, and we'll talk to some lawyers here and continue to follow up on what's been going on the last 3 weeks. But again, when you talk about the criminal portion of this, Demetrius has been charged with capital murder, but in 6 years, we haven't got an opportunity for him to stand trial because he has been found mentally unfit to stand trial. So the criminal portion of this trial is really at a standstill. And if you think about the families that lost someone from that tragic day, that's a hard pill to swallow, knowing that the person that committed this, the person who confessed, I should say, who admitted to committing this crime, is not being held responsible. And then on the civil side of things here, they also did not get what they were looking for. But this is something we will continue to follow. Really sad day for the family members as well. And when the judge was reading that verdict here today, you also saw the parents of Demetrius, Antonius, and Rosemarie. They too were emotional with this ruling here today. Again, they're not financially liable, but it's, according to the defense attorney, it's been a difficult 6 years for them as well. She went on to say that the defense attorney says that they too were victims in all of this. But we'll continue to follow this case for you here on Fox26Houston.com. We'll have much more on this historic day where the jury has now said that the parents of the former student, Demetrius Pogorchis, that confessed to killing 10 people at Santa Fe High School, not financially liable. That's it for us here at Fox 26 online. I'll bring you guys some more updates on your Fox 26 news at 9 and 10. Have a good night.